The Retirement Cafe podcast, How the Menopause Affects the Brain, with Dr. Ben Webb. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast with me, your host, Justin King. If you're thinking about your retirement or already retired, you're in the right place. My aim is to help you plan for and live a successful and meaningful retirement. Retirement is far more than just a financial event. It's a significant life event, a major transition, which will bring with it new challenges and opportunities. So each episode contains tips, information, and inspiration to help you feel more informed and confident about your retirement. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Ben Webb, who was first on the podcast in episode 159. Ben is a neuroscientist, a psychology lecturer, a speaker and author specialising in how the brain works. In fact, he spent 20 years researching the brain and has a special interest in how the brain changes during the perimenopause and the menopause stages of life. Until fairly recently, the menopause has not been discussed widely, but that's certainly changing thanks to some high-profile celebrities like Davina McCall campaigning for better education and access to HRT. So my conversation with Ben feels quite timely. Ben explains how, contrary to popular belief, the menopause is a neurological process and how the hormonal changes have a tangible effect on a woman's brain. He also explains why some of the common symptoms occur, the latest thinking on HRT, and why the timing of the menopause seems to be a design fault for women. I really enjoyed my conversation with Ben, and it's fair to say that I learned quite a lot. So I hope there's something new and of interest to yourself and maybe someone you know. Please do share this episode. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Ben Webb. Welcome back to the Retirement Cafe podcast, Dr. Ben Webb.
Thank you so much for having me on again. It's a delight to be here, Justin.
Well, Ben, the last episode that you were on, you were so informative, and so many people have commented on it, and it was really fantastic. So, and I do know that you have kind of another stream to kind of brain health and all-round health. The brain advice for women this time, very specifically to women to make the most of their magnificent midlife. Yes. Tell me more about that.
As any woman will tell you, and I don't need to tell you, but just to summarize it, is that women are being pulled in every single direction in midlife, and have the kind of biggest burden of care in lots of ways, in terms of often holding down a full-time job whilst trying to parent teenagers, and often, looking after elderly parents as well, amongst many other demands on their time. They're often called the sandwich generation, for at that time of life. So there's that, but there's actually a more serious reason as well. That's because women, incredibly sadly, are twice as likely as men to end up with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So,
wow, I didn't know that.
So, and that's post menopause, but so 60, 65 years onwards. So there's a real need. So 2 out of 3 Alzheimer's cases are women. So that was actually our original, the sort of motivation for helping with women specifically, and there's much more sort of tangible elements, obviously for women in midlife as well. And the biggest one of those is that, well, throughout life, women go through, hormonal changes that men don't, and as a consequence that has specific effects on their brain, which is why it needs specific help and support. And in the field, we call them the sort of 3 Ps: pregnancy, puberty, and perimenopause. So obviously, puberty, pregnancy, and perimenopause. And obviously, men go through puberty, but pregnancy and perimenopause is exclusively a woman's event. And those events, those hormonal events, have tangible effects on a woman's brain, as she knows very well as she's going through those. And we focus specifically on helping women with menopausal symptoms and the ways to relieve some of the brain symptoms, because again, up until recently, often the science would have said that, or certainly, in discussion and in science as well, that you might not think of menopausal symptoms as a brain problem. You might think of it in a slightly different way, originating from a different organ. But actually, menopausal symptoms are caused by fluctuating levels of ovarian hormones, but that's including estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. But these hormones actually regulate how the brain functions and how the brain governs their release, meaning that menopause is actually a neurological process as well. So the sort of classic kind of menopausal symptoms are things like problems sleeping, hot flushes, depression. So really, so low mood is an incredibly common element to menopause and perimenopause. Night sweats. These are brain symptoms. And just before I start talking about those more specifically, just to be clear about what I mean by, so perimenopause is this stage, it's the lead up that can last for about 10 years up until a woman goes into menopause. And when she's in menopause, that's the moment in which she has her last period. And the average age of menopause is about 51.
Right.
So it can be a kind of lead up to that, but on average of about 10 years. It's an incredibly confusing time, and like as we were discussing, off air before we came on, it's fantastic now. There's so much more awareness and discussion about this particular issue in the media, particularly. But up until relatively recently, it was not discussed, and it can be confusing and frightening for a lot of women, particularly at that stage, because during perimenopause as well, because of the nature of the way your hormones are fluctuating across the day. There is no single sort of test at that point to diagnose that you've actually in menopause. And it's only after you've gone through menopause that you can diagnose, for a better way of putting it, because it's a completely natural biological process of actually being in menopause. So we really just try and help. The thing that we do is just really just try and sort of help women managing the brain symptoms specifically of menopause. And just to sort of outline a few, that sort of the things that women most commonly experience, I've alluded to a couple of them, but perhaps the one that's sort of least well defined but most commonly experienced is what we call brain fog. So that brain, it's not a medical diagnosis, it's actually a description of of the symptoms,
right.
But it's a real phenomenon for a woman who's suffering kind of slow or hazy thinking, difficulty focusing, confusion, lack of concentration,
right.
and forgetfulness. And it's often described, certainly when with all of the ladies that we work with, and you hear more generally, this feeling of sort of having cotton wool inside your head.
Wow.
And one thing that's so important and particularly sort of relevant to our discussion in the previous episode that we recorded together is that brain fog at this time of life can often get confused with mental decline. And it's a big, big concern, a big worry that these experiences, this fogginess in your thinking and your memory and confusion and so on, and forgetfulness, is actually the early signs of mental decline and dementia, which is, actually a result of brain aging and not a result of brain fog. But, the similarities between brain fog and age-related mental decline actually, so they cause this lots of anxiety, but, and many women assume, as I say, that, it's caused by Alzheimer's disease. And unfortunately, there's no easy test to distinguish between the two situations, except for that at the time at which you're experiencing as a woman, as you're experiencing kind of menopausal brain fog, is typically, except for a small number of sort of of early onset kind of Alzheimer's disease cases, it's much more likely in that age range, in your sort of 40s to mid 50s, early 60s, so late 50s, to be menopausal just in terms of your age. So It's very, because typically symptoms of dementia don't, if you're going to experience them, don't really happen until you're in your 60s and mid 60s and beyond, 65 and beyond, that as earliest, except for the very specific early onset forms, which has a different cause. So that's, one to reassure people. One way to distinguish is just using your age, essentially, that you wouldn't be in the right age range to be, and there are some subtle differences in terms of, which it's hard to get into in this kind of conversation.
Yeah.
And another common symptom that women experience at this time of life as well in menopause is hot flushes. These typically last sort of 30 seconds to 10 minutes, but some can last longer and different from woman to women. And the vast majority of women experience these sort of dramatic changes up to about 5 years after their last sort of menstrual period. The final one to there's many more, but just wanted to highlight the one. So So when women are thinking about the symptoms and experience they're actually if they're having them now, is disturbed sleep. And this is an incredibly common problem during the menopause. And this is because a woman's brain actually loses control over their sleep-wake cycles. It's your brain, if you didn't know that controls your sleep-wake cycle, called your circadian rhythm. And as you go through menopause, your brain loses control over that cycle. And that's caused by the decline in hormones like estrogen at this time. And insomnia is often associated with like night sweats, depression, and thinking disturbances during the night. So it goes without saying that if you're not sleeping well, this is also going to affect, your mood and your memory as well. I suppose one additional thing to sort of say is that stress also, can have a huge effect on exacerbating menopausal symptoms. That's something else, that we try to work on and help women with to kind of manage stress during that time. So, and the actual, at this point, is what could I do about it? When I'm in that situation, and as many women know, because it's now so widely advertised, which is just a great thing for by far and above the best way to kind of manage the symptoms once you've experienced them and once they've been identified and labeled and diagnosed as menopausal is hormone replacement therapy. So unfortunately, there's lots of sort of slightly misguided advice out there that sort of all originates, and particularly and sadly from in the medical profession still. So women will again, and will tell you this when you go to see her doctor. You often come up against resistance for treatment with hormonal replacement therapy, and it all originates from a study that was done 30 odd years ago, which came up which turned out to be a spurious conclusion about the risk of HRT and cancer, and that turns out not to be true because they were looking at the wrong kind of age range of women in the study, and the works has reworked the study and shown that that's not the case. So hormone replacement therapy, at the age at which you experience menopause, is safe for the vast majority of women and can be used to boost the hormonal levels that decline during menopause. And amazing, and it's an incredible thing to see actually when women, for the women that can access HRT, when they take HRT, find that their motivation, their energy, a focus and memory really, really improves, and very, very quickly as well. Right. So this really has huge, very beneficial effect on the quality of life, but also their ability to sort of function well, in the workplace as well, if they're still working and at home. But one thing just to sort of finish on that on menopause, it's important to say that not all women are eligible for hormone replacement therapy because of their specific medical history. So that is a treatment option. Always be carefully considered in sort of discussion with your GP or physician. And there are more naturalistic, holistic kind of approaches. So, for example, yoga menopause, something we talked about on our podcast before, is also a very naturalistic way of helping and relieving a lot of the symptoms. And there are other sort of holistic practices like that can be very, very beneficial.
So what I'm hearing, Ben, I mean, I was just thinking what an amazing challenge that you've got, especially with maybe ladies having children later nowadays. I think, from if you go back to my parents' ages, they had children in their 20s rather than maybe in their 30s, even into the early 40s now. And then you've got, if you go through the kind of young children phase where I have been through, and it is a lack of sleep and all that stuff's going on, and then another, only a few years later, if you can come through that, you then get hit by the menopause and everything's coming at you again. This is a tough old ride. This is this is significant, and of course, what interests me there is. At what point do you identify and go, look, I need to go and see my GP or my physician, because this is actually something's going on and I need extra help? Or, because I can imagine that you could also be going, this is just the way life is, because I've actually, going through all of that, it's been tough already. And this is just a continuation of this toughness. They then move into teenage children, etc., of course. And you've got all of that going on as well. So, this is a massive life stage, isn't it? And then what's your guidance at this point? For what point you need to kind of reach out and say, yeah, I do need to go and have a chat with my GP here?
Well, the classic, our guidance in simple terms is to reach out and to get help and support, because sadly, women are sort of sat in silence for way many 2 years, suffering, sometimes with incredible pain, so both physically and mentally and emotionally during this sort of time, and suffered in silence and not had, either the support, or the inclination to ask for help. But often there's a bit of shame there associated with, with doing that as well for women, because they're always, juggling all the balls and keeping everything going, and everyone depending on them. And actually, so it's one of the big sort of almost sort of psychological hurdles that we get over a lot of the time when we're working with women at this stage, is actually asking for help and reaching out is exactly the thing that you need to do, and not holding on and putting up with it and thinking this is just a normal aspect of part of life is the wrong thing to do. And something, as you've touched on there as well, is that you have this sort of confluence almost of these events. I characterized it before that, like, regardless of what your sort of, whether you're you have religious beliefs or not, or you're agnostic, that when or if you believe in evolution, when evolution or God, let's say, was designing this biological system, how it decided to arrive at this system where you go through menopause at the time you have teenage children is seems like a design fault for women, and that's because it's, as you say, this conflict, because now you have these these hormonal, these a woman who's going through all these brain changes as well, and a teenager that is going through hormonal but also massive brain changes as well at the same time, that are clashing at that point. And that we can talk about that more, but that makes that challenge even more difficult for women at that stage of life.
This has been absolutely fascinating, because sitting here from a male's perspective, and it's a study of one, i.e. me, but listening to this, I'm starting to become much more aware of my own relationship. Where am I at comparable to what's going on in my family's life? And obviously, males being educated in this is hugely beneficial to create empathy and understanding.
Absolutely. You're so right. There's a lot of sort of lazy thinking and sort of out of date traditional thinking about menopause, for sure, like with men certainly, and even women to some extent, and similarly with teenagers as well, the way we sort of often stereotype teenagers in a particular way. It's a similar sort of kind of lazy thinking. And that's a lot of that, as you say, a lot of that education, that psychoeducation, is so important for changing the narrative around the way menopause is thought of. Not something to be mocked or laughed at, or even to thought of as a disease process. It's not. It's a natural biological process that happens to a woman that has dramatic effects psychologically, emotionally, physically on her, that can be debilitating. So for some women, so absolutely, some empathy and some understanding, goes a long way, for sure, from their partners.
So Ben, obviously you when we've previously talked about Alzheimer's and dementia, you talked about the 6 pillars. Now, if we come back to the menopause, and all those previous 10 years that are leading up to it, what, other than HRT, which is what you gave the hormone replacement therapy, other than that, what are the big aspects? What are the kind of lifestyle aspects that women can kind of put into their life that is going to ease this period of their life, or just improve?
Yeah. I mean, it's important to say that, unlike brain health, that in generic terms, it's not quite as, as well-rounded in terms of pillars and so on, because, or not as symmetrical, let me put it that way, because HRT is so, transformative, for many women, and half of a big part of the battle is actually getting to the point where they're sort of, willing to engage in the conversation of actually having HRT in the first place. And because so many women are eligible, given their medical history and so on or whatever, that is sort of primary, if you like, in what you can do. But in terms of the naturalistic things that, the diet and lifestyle things that you can do is quite similar in lots of ways. That, very much, a diet low in processed food and salt and sugar, high in vegetables, and fruit and so on, and nuts, as we discussed before. Again, there's lots of, and particularly berries, and and we can get these sort of polyphenols and so on from, there are sort of natural sources where you can get, so things like soy, for example, natural sources where you can boost some of the estrogen that's depleted during menopause. But unfortunately, this is why I'm sort of slightly hesitating, is because you can't actually eat enough of those things to completely, replace it. So, it only really can come from hormone replacement therapy, because you're replacing the hormones, that you've lost. That can be delivered in lots of different ways. But similarly, so exercise, and sleep. But the problem is that, those things are hard to come by, when you're in the state that the women often are during the kind of difficult parts of perimenopause and menopause. It's hard to come by those actual factors because you're suffering with sleep deprivation anyway, and because of that, you're less motivated to exercise. But again, exercise, can and does relieve some of the symptoms. But so one of the go-to practice that we work with our clients who can't take HRT is actually yoga. So yoga menopause is like a growing practice now. This incredibly effective, both for there's actually lots of specific kind of sort of biological reasons as well, but also for the community aspect of that, actually relieving some of, that practice of yoga menopause works specifically on the different stages of menopause, so perimenopause, menopause, and post-menopause, and can work on specific symptoms that women experience during menopause. And it can be incredibly relieving, and that's really our sort of the first place that we go to for women that can't take HRT.
Right, brilliant. Well, once again, this has been a fascinating conversation, Ben. I really do appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me, Justin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you to Ben for taking some time out of his busy schedule to share his insights into menopause and the brain. Head over to the show notes on our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk for more information about this episode. And as ever, if you've enjoyed this episode, please do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, as it really helps more people like you find us. You may know that I post all the episodes on my YouTube channel, which has the handle @Justin_King. For those who prefer to watch, you can go head there and subscribe so you never miss an episode. So until next time, I'm Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.